Hey guys, welcome back to my channel today. In today's video, we are going to be diving right into the new Charlotte Tilbury Palette of Pops Dazzling Diamonds edition for holiday 2020. You guys seem to show enough interest in this little guy for me to pick up and review, and I do have some thoughts, and unfortunately they are not all good. So if you guys want to know my thoughts on whether or not I think that this is worth the crazy luxury price tag or not, then just keep watching. So let's get right on into it. If you guys are new to my channel, my name is Jenna and I am a high-end and luxury makeup reviewer. This is my niche, my passion, my knowledge base. I don't really dip into drugstore makeup too much because I just don't know about it, but I test a ton of high-end and luxury makeup, and I do think that because of that, I'm able to give you guys quite a bit of information as to whether or not a product is worth investing in or not. When we're dealing with high-end and luxury, it's pretty expensive stuff, so I always want to make sure that you're investing wisely. So the latest thing we're talking about today is this Charlotte Tilbury Luxury Palette of Pops. As you can see, the outer packaging is super stunning. It actually matches the 12 pan palette that she's recently released also, which is the Bejeweled Eyes to Hypnotize. And that's kind of like the theme with her packaging, because this dark amber with the jewel detailing is also on the holiday highlighter this year. So it's kind of like a theme across the releases this year. And then on the inside, the palette has similar detailing. So you can see here that it's really shining in the light, a really gorgeous like light rays with stars and stuff. And then you've got the jewel at the middle with the Charlotte Tilbury logo on it. This is the same kind of deep purple enamel packaging that she typically uses, and she has released Palette of Pops in the past. So this year's rendition of this is actually an interesting color story. You can see here that there is a bright pinky white. We have a golden, kind of like a yellow golden with a bit of a bronze quality. We have an amber in there. We also have a really deep royal blue. The Palette of Pops essentially is just a quad of 4 pop shades, and if you're familiar with Charlotte Tilbury and how she organizes her quads, she typically has a prime shade, an enhanced shade, a smoke shade, and a pop shade. And that pop shade is typically this really gorgeous, shimmery, very thin, creamy glaze over the eyelid that's supposed to kind of seal and give a nice glossy finish. And there is that one pop shade in every single quad, but when she found out that we were all interested in more of those pop shades, she released things like this, which are essentially all 4 pop shades, and there's no mattes in this puppy or anything. It's just that specialty finishing shade that she's put together in special release quads. This is a limited edition quad. It does retail for 53 American dollars on Charlotte Tilbury's website, and on the Canadian site it retails for 66 Canadian dollars. I'm a Canadian YouTuber and the Canadian price is pretty important to me, so I often share that price as well, just so you guys have some context as to how the conversion rate applies to a Canadian buyer. Now for my look today, I wanted to actually test out all of these shades to see if the formula was consistent between some of her other Palette of Pops, especially this limited edition palettes, as well as the pop shades that are in her quads. And because I've actually owned quite a few of her quads and I've owned quite a few of her Palette of Pop special releases, I do feel like I'm fairly well versed in this formula, so I feel like I can tell right away if it's not a consistent quality or not. So as you can see here, the first way that you can apply these shadows is actually with your fingertip, and you can see in Charlotte's promotion with regards to these palettes, she's often using her fingertips for application, not just for the Palette of Pops formula, but also for her other shades. She likes to get in there and be hands-on, but there's a lot of you guys that don't like doing that. So I applied the next shade, which is that deep blue, with a brush, and the brush that I used is a MAC 248. This is a synthetic haired brush, and it's just nice and compact, very thin also, so it picks up the powder pretty easily and then deposits it onto the eyelid effortlessly also. So you are wanting to look for something that's fairly dense in a brush to pick up this kind of formula because it is a little bit looser. The next brush that I used is actually a Luxie 231 brush. and I actually picked up the Prime shade, which is that bright kind of whitey pinky shade, and I just kind of used it to kind of connect the shades together. Now this look to me, I don't know if it's my favorite yet. It looks a little bit muddled at times, but it was something I wanted to do to really test all of the shades, but also see if they're a cohesive color story. Compared to the gold and the blue, this also performed consistently. It translated nice and bright on the lid, and with the brush pickup, there was minimal kick up in the pan. The last thing I went into is I actually just used one of my small rougher eye brushes, and I picked up the last shade, which is that golden amber. And this is one that I just wanted to dab into the outer corner of the eye to add a little bit of dimension. But as you can see, you don't really notice a super big difference when applying this shade. I do think that this is one of the qualms of this palette, is that these two shades here, although they look really, really different in pan, I mean, you can tell they're kind of from the same family, but they do have a distinction in the pan. I do think that upon swatch, which you can see right here next, they're actually not that different. And that was kind of a bit of a missed opportunity for me. I think that she could have put some other shade in there that had a bit more distinction, because when you're thinking about the standard user, you want to have enough distinction on the lid to make it worthwhile to add that shade on the lid. So for me, it was a little bit too close, but that's also a preference thing. I think there she could have added something with a little bit more distinction and a little bit of a different color entirely to kind of make that palette more versatile. The second qualm about these types of palettes is the fact that this is such a thin, creamy formula. Because a lot of people do apply this with a fingertip, one thing that can really happen easily with these types of pop shades is hard pan. So for me, what I do is if I'm applying it with a finger, first of all, I just make sure that my hands are clean. And when I apply it with a finger, you will see after, I feel like at least 5 uses or so, the powder will start to feel pretty compact in the pan. And it's just because you do inevitably have oils on your hands, plus you're pushing that pigment kind of deeper in the pan as you're swirling your finger around. What actually happens is hard pan does develop, and eventually you have poor translation from your finger to your lid. My tip for that is always just to take a piece of tape, a clear piece of tape, and gently lift that top layer, because that top layer is where you've got that compact oil from your hands, the compact powder, and it helps kind of loosen up the pan a little bit better for you. So because of the fact that we do have hard pan as a really real possibility with these, and the fact that the color story to me doesn't have a ton of diversity, this is kind of why, in general, although the formula is consistent, I do think that this is going to be a palette that's going to be more so catered to the Charlotte Tilbury collector, the person that loves this formula, I think. So if you have purchased a palette of pops before, you found that you got a ton of use out of it, this is going to be a really good gift for someone like you. But if you purchased a palette like this and found that you weren't using them a ton, I think you can definitely skip this, because this is definitely a preference formula. I do like when she has one pop shade amongst a matte and some other shimmers, like more satin shimmers, because it helps keep the color story cohesive and you can really like build up the look. You can start with the matte, then have a shimmer, a little pop in the center, and a smoke in the outer corner of the lid. But this is one that, I don't know, it doesn't give me a ton of inspiration as much, and that just might be my personal preference. Like I'm saying, I'm really prefacing that, especially with the fact that these two shades are like sort of similar. Like they really just translate too closely on the lid for me. The other good thing about this formula is that there is very minimal fallout. Even when you apply it with a fingertip versus a brush, I think you get like maybe the tiniest amount of fallout with brush application, but it's very, very minimal. That is the one strength that I love about this formula, is that it is super shimmery, but the fallout is not insane. Charlotte Tilbury's formulas in general, though, typically don't give you a ton of fallout anyway. If you're going to be using this palette as an accessory palette, which most people probably are, because really when you're using looks with just this palette, there's not a ton of leeway you can go. So some people will probably buy this just for an accessory and they will add, you know, the blue on top of a different look and stuff like that. Now that's going to be something you're going to have to figure out for yourself if that's going to be worth the money to invest in an accessory palette. With regards to this palette by itself, I don't think you can go too far with the versatility of looks. Now here's the last thing about this formula that I have noticed when I just apply the palette of pops by itself. You do need a considerable amount of layers for this formula alone. in my opinion. Now I have hooded eyes, so I have deep creases on my eyelids. That is always something that I have to make sure I account for. When it comes to stuff like this, you really need like 2 to 3 layers of each color to really pack on enough of the shadow to make sure it doesn't crack. So for me, I definitely prime my lid with my Smashbox 24-hour eye primer. It's one of my favorites. This to me then becomes a fairly expensive palette for accessory use only. Don't have a ton of diversity with this. We've got 2 shades that look pretty close translated on the lid anyway. And you have the real possibility of hard pan, so that's gonna be something to always make sure you're watching for. If you don't want that at all, then just continue to use brushes for application. But I don't know, this is definitely more suited to someone that loves this formula. If you're on the fence though, and you want a Charlotte Tilbury like holiday palette, I actually think that this one, which is her holiday 2020 12 pan palette, I actually think that this is probably more worth the buy. Without saying that and hurting someone's feelings. Just because although it's more expensive, yes, I do think the versatility is way, way more. I think the fact that you can get a sparkly gold out of this palette too. So if you have already purchased this, do know that you are getting a sparkly gold finish already. You also have a couple shimmery pinky whites in here too. So really you're buying that deep navy, to be honest, when it comes down to things at the end of the day. So if you want to get this palette, the formulations are consistent in all 4 pans, and you can definitely be satisfied with the fact that she hasn't changed how that formulation is. It's still creamy, it's still thin, it's still very, very shimmery on the lid. I would 100% prime your eyes before using this, and I also think that this is going to be, I think, to most people an accessory palette. So as long as you guys are okay with the price point, being that you'll most likely have to use another palette as well as this, that's always something to think about. You guys know I love Charlotte Tilbury's so much, so this is obviously a very honest review about this product. As always, I don't hesitate to tell you guys what I think, so do let me know your thoughts about this palette down below. Is this something that you are going to be buying? Until my next one, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions about this palette, I would be happy to answer them in the comments down below. And until my next one, take care and stay safe. Bye, guys.
You and me, everything that we've been through has made us strong. You won't believe we've had our gray, but somewhere there's a light inside of us. It shows the way.